From the News Channel 5 network, this is Inside Politics.
Hello, everyone. I'm News Channel 5's political analyst, Pat Nolan. Welcome to Inside Politics. We're now entering the 4th month since Russia invaded Ukraine. Thousands are dead, millions have fled the country. Others are now refugees in their own nation, as the level of destruction in many parts of the Ukraine is total. The conflict continues to have impact worldwide as well. To discuss all these topics and where we are and what might be happening in the future, we again welcome back Vanderbilt Professor of History and Political Science, Dr. Thomas Schwartz. Dr. Schwartz, as always, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us.
Thank you for having me on the program.
When the invasion began back on February 24th, nobody predicted that this would last very long. They thought the Russians would get an easy victory. What happened?
It's fascinating in some sense because we evacuated our embassy. We expected a collapse rather quickly. We offered Zelensky the opportunity to flee. So I think we're all surprised. Our intelligence people were surprised by the level of Ukrainian resistance and the level of Russian incompetence. In a way, it has been a fascinating example of how states can get so much wrong. And I think Ukraine's defiance of Russia has been really quite a surprise.
Is all this, in terms of their military weakness, a surprise to the Russians, although the Russian public probably doesn't know it's that bad?
That's right. The Russian public doesn't know it, but I think it's a surprise not only to the Russians of their military weakness, but of course to us. I think we expected them because they had experienced some successes in late. Of course, those successes, for example, in 2014, did involve sort of special forces and were undertaken in manner when they first seized parts of the Ukraine, and they did have a success in Syria, but they didn't use their regular military in Syria. They used special forces, and also they largely used their bombing and other ways rather than their direct military force.
The Russians have lost so many generals. That's very unusual, it seems, particularly in modern warfare. They also haven't been able to get air superiority. And, you know, in modern warfare, if you don't have air superiority, you're in trouble.
Yeah, and that's something of a surprise, because I think if you remember early in the war, the big demand from the Ukrainians was a no-fly zone, in part to prevent that. But in fact, the Russians never acquired air superiority, which says something about the degree to which their own air force has not been, is not the formidable foe that we thought it was. And I think in that sense, the lack of air superiority, the difficulties in command and control, the loss of generals, also points to serious weaknesses within the Russian military.
They just don't train, or the generals have to do more direct things down on the field.
They don't have the pattern of non-commissioned officers with delegated authority to make decisions that the American Army and other NATO armies have adopted. In that sense, there have been efforts to have reforms of the Russian Army, but that's been one that goes back quite a ways in Russian history, a reluctance to delegate, which may be connected to a fear that the delegation of authority will lead to some sort of mutinies or efforts against the government.
The Russians have taken the port of Mariupol after a very long siege. That appears to be their greatest victory so far in this war, but what does it mean? Does it really give them any kind of advantage at this point, because it took so long to actually achieve that victory?
Well, it does. It's a horrible advantage in the sense that they basically had to level the city, but the construction, in effect, of a land bridge to Crimea from the Donbas region, which they continue to fight over, does change the calculus. It is one of those situations in which now they are effectively controlling eastern and southern Ukraine in ways that will make it difficult to have a peace settlement that Ukraine could accept.
How much of this Russia's failure has been because they not only underestimated the Ukrainian forces, they also underestimated the unity and resolve of NATO and the United States? They didn't think they would respond in this way.
I think that's right. I would give first credit to the Ukrainians, but I think the fact that the West, I think the Russians may have felt the Germans, for example, would not act because of their reliance on Russian gas and oil. I think they thought that the Western alliance was very divided and focused on its domestic issues, and of course the United States with its own domestic problems. I think they were surprised by that unity, and especially the degree to which the West has provided weaponry to the Ukrainians.
Looking back into history, the United States has always been very good at outproducing their opponents, whether it's been World War I or World War II. Our ability to produce and deliver war materials always made the big difference. Did Russia forget about that? Did they forget about what they did, what they got from Lend-Lease to beat the Germans?
I'm tempted to say we always forget our history. That's one of the reasons historians can stay employed. But it is also the case. It is also the case that I think they expected a rapid Ukrainian collapse, which would have obviated any possibility that aid would matter. So, in that sense, just like we were surprised, they were surprised that the Ukrainians didn't fold. Have
you been surprised at the bipartisan support for these efforts in Washington to help wage this war? Congress recently approved another $40 billion in aid. That's more money than the president asked for, almost twice as much as what he asked for. Why this unity in Washington? They're united on very few things, but this appears to be one of them, with the exception of a few small Republicans in the House who vote against it.
Yeah. And about 10 members of the Senate, including the Tennessee senators who voted against the aid package. But I am surprised. Mitch McConnell gave an interview recently talking about this, and he felt like this was a case in which there was no confusion as to who the aggressor was and who the victim was. In a sense, McConnell said, look, Iraq and Afghanistan were messy and confused. This is not the case. And I think the combination of the fact that the Ukrainians showed that they had backbone and character to resist, along with the fact that this was an outright land grab with no particular justifications, simplified the issues for bipartisan cooperation. But I think it is still a remarkable commentary that despite the polarization and division in American politics, that you can still get unity on something like this.
Now, the Russians have still inflicted some pretty severe damage and losses on the Ukraine. Russian ability can certainly to get a lot of rockets. Artillery fire has besieged and captured several cities across the country. Is this war headed towards being a long, drawn-out stalemate? We don't hear any talk anymore about negotiations or even much about ceasefires.
We don't. There are some efforts underway to get a ceasefire. Some of the European countries have suggested it, but Ukraine right now doesn't want to accept one with a full Russian withdrawal. The Russians are not talking about that. We may be looking at a much longer war than people suggested, although it does seem to me that the Russian objectives have scaled back to simply controlling the Donbass region and the south.
Dr. Thomas Schwartz of Vanderbilt University is our guest. He's a history and political science professor there. We're talking about the war in Ukraine. Back to continue our conversation after this break.